All right, everybody. We are here with our good friend Anis Shivani once again. Anis, thank you for joining us for one of our Dissident Film Club test episodes. Appreciate it. Always good to see you, my friend.
Thanks. It's really exciting to talk about the great stuff in life as opposed to the politics. Like Harper, is it No, what's his name? I already forget. Theo James's character's name in
Cameron.
season 2. Cameron, right. So Cameron and Daphne, like we don't talk about politics. We're just not interested. What's happening in the world? And
Right. We
Harper's
don't
like,
watch
the
the
world is
news,
coming to
as
an
we say.
end, and she's like, what are you talking about? So I like this.
Anis and I are here to talk about The White Lotus, the new HBO show that was the talk of every town, it seemed, and right when the season two ended. Because seasons one and two are both fully available on HBO, a lot of people just binged both seasons at once. That's how I
Mhm.
absorbed
That's
it.
how I did it too. Yeah.
Yeah, we watched season one and then we went straight into season two.
Right.
Because season one did fairly well, but season two is the one that made the really big splash. And of course, there are all sorts of, I won't say necessarily political, although there are definitely political undertones of the show.
Hmm.
There's a lot of social commentary in the show,
Hmm.
particularly class based social commentary, which is one of the themes of our show. And so we thought it would be good to talk about this. But I'll throw to you first, my friend, since it was just sort of kismet that we both happened to
Watch it
be
at the same
binging the show at
time.
the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I messaged you like halfway through when you were watching the finale.
The final episode, right? And my question was, what happens to Tanya? Is he going to let her get away with, killing all the Italians?
That's
And
right. I messaged you. I said
right,
I can't spoil it for
you
you
can't
yet.
spoil it for
So
me. So it was a sign of it was a really suspenseful, great show. I think some of the best TV I've watched since Breaking Bad. And you're right that the first season won the 10 Emmys or whatever it was a ridiculous number, and they did well. But it was only the second season that it's become, I think, the zeitgeist show, and everybody's talking about it, and you have to know what this is all about, right? So it turned out not to disappoint at all. We can critique it from our different social political perspectives, aesthetic perspectives, but it is incredibly watchable. It is, I mean, the cinematography, the music, the production values, it is just really great. So I don't know how you think about that, but I think it's just a really, really, absorbing, compelling show.
yeah, it was definitely well done. I watched the first episode,
Mhm.
and the first episode of season one, I just put up a little Facebook post. I said, this
Mhm.
seems to be about the banality and vacuousness of the 1%.
Right.
And it's nothing I don't agree with. It's just that as someone who worked in New York City tourism for years, I already knew that. Like, I already was exposed to just how empty these characters are. And the show really seemed to be just fundamentally about that. And it's written and directed by Mike White,
Hmm.
who, one of the interesting points I guess I'll start with is that Mike White has been a writer for a long time. He wrote for TV shows Freaks and Geeks. He wrote for Dawson's Creek.
Hmm.
He also wrote these two comedies back in one that came out, I think, in the late 90s, one in the early
Captain Buck
2000s.
in 2000, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
One
House of
was
Rock.
called Dead Man on Campus, and the other
Oh,
one was called Orange County. And they're these
oh,
two
okay.
really funny goofball teen comedies, and I think they're both really good. I mean, it's lowbrow stuff, it's goofier stuff, but I
Right,
recommend that you watch both of those because
right.
they are college comedies, but they're not college comedies in the sense of, just like a sort of vulgar celebration of the like debauchery of college life. Like I find those movies kind of boring and unfunny, right? These two were very sort of anti-establishment, very subversive in the sense that they really tore down the prestige of academia as an institution, right? Even as dumb as they were, and as funny as they were, and as sort of silly as they were, Dead Man on Campus is about this kid who's like failing out of school, and he realizes that there's this loophole in his sort of like college code that if a student's roommate dies during the semester, that student gets straight A's, right? Because they're not going to make him actually
Mhm.
perform academically
Mhm.
if his roommate dies. So then he swaps roommates, and the goal of the movie is for him to try to find a roommate who's most likely to die before before the end of the
Mhm.
term, right? The second one is a movie called Orange County. It's about this kind of like bright egghead nerdy kid played by Colin Hanks, actually son of Tom Hanks, who aspires to be a writer, and he wants to get into Stanford. He's this great student and he wants to go study at Stanford with this novelist who is a hero of his. And through a series of hijinks, he finally, at the end, finagles himself into Stanford, only to realize that Stanford is just as shallow and ridiculous a place as his hometown of Orange County, Los Angeles. And ultimately, he chooses to stay home and be in the area he grew up in, surrounded
Mhm.
by the people he loves, his family, his surfer buddies, girlfriend. He chooses that life over the sort of prestige of going to this, very sort of esteemed university. And the themes of those two movies, or I'd say the ethos of those two movies, are very similar to the ethos of The White Lotus in the sense that they both dabble in sort of the artifice of prestige, the artifice of success, the artifice of status, right? They both sort of cut underneath all that to expose that really all of those things, success, status, prestige, they're all really bullshit. They're all really meaningless. Because ultimately, if the people who pursue those things are empty people, and in many cases they are, in many cases they have to be, right? Society sort of selects people like that to rise in that way. Then it ultimately means nothing. And the really interesting thing about The White Lotus is that as much as all these characters have it all, right? They're all very good looking. They all have good looking partners. They all have, more money than they would ever know what to do with. We don't really envy any of them. The audience does not wish, we don't wish we were any of these people. We don't envy them at all because they're so empty. They're so boring. They're so banal. They're so uninteresting. And you would think that means the show itself would be uninteresting. But the show is not uninteresting because as much as the characters are very nihilistic, the show doesn't feel nihilistic at all. The show has a sort of moral core, a moral center to it. It's just that the moral center of the show is not embodied by any of the characters. The moral center of the show really is the audience. Like, we are invited to judge these people. And everybody seems to judge them differently. That's why, I don't know if you noticed,
Mhm.
but there are dozens of think pieces about who the real villains of the show are.
Right.
Right? Is it Cameron? Is it Daphne?
Who's
Is
the
it
worst character?
Jennifer
Who's the
Coolidge? Right.
most
Who's the
heinous?
worst
Who's the
one?
most cruel?
We
Who's
all
the
have different opinions
best
about
one?
that because
Yeah.
these people are
Right.
all they're all extremely flawed, but they're all extremely real. They're all the kinds of
Right.
people that we kind of run into
We've met
throughout our lives. Yeah.
all or most of these people in different guises. Perhaps not. We may not be in talking terms with the $500 million lady, but we've seen, all of us have encountered and been with or worked for or with, these types of people like Tanya with their, privilege and entitlement and their whininess and so on. And so yeah, I mean, in the novelistic sense, this is called polyphony, which is Mikhail Bakhtin's idea that you put all these voices together in a novel, and the voices speak, and you, the audience or the reader, decide for yourself what you want to make of it. And I think he's very good at that. And I want to get to, one of the points that naturally arises from what you just said is that season one was more explicitly about class privilege,
Right.
as Mike White has recognized, and that's how I believe he went into that season thinking that that is what was going to be his, main theme in the setting of Hawaii. And then season two is said to be more about sexual politics and, the sexual dynamics within, intra class, within the
The
upper
1%.
class,
Right.
and not so much the in relation to the serving or helping class, or the, the service hospitality people, as was the case in season one. um what I want to say about that is that Mike White is a really smart guy, as is evident from his interviews. And you mentioned Orange County, which I did see, by the way, in the early aughts when it was a huge thing on cable TV. So I
It's funny,
remember
isn't it?
watching
Don't you
that.
love that movie? It's so funny.
Yeah, and Jack Black was,
Oh, great.
yeah, I love Jack Black at that period of time. But the one, and you mentioned Dead Man on Campus, which I hadn't heard of, but he's apparently been doing a lot of stuff since the 90s. You mentioned Dawson's Creek too. The ones that are most typically mentioned these days in connection with his work are his movie, which I have not seen, Chuck and Buck, where I think he's an actor, he's pursuing somebody obsessively, as a gay character, if I'm not mistaken. That's from 2000. And then House of Rock with Jack Black, I think in the mid aughts. And
School of
then,
Rock, yeah.
right, Enlightened is another one with Laura Dern in 2011, also on HBO with the Hawaii setting where she has a breakdown, nervous breakdown at work, and she goes to Hawaii to recover and become a different kind of enlightened person. I just started watching it last night, by the way. So that those, it seems like in this, just like with Breaking Bad, it just so happens that he's brought all his previous experiences, 25, 30 years of Hollywood work, these different genres. And also, by the way, he was a contestant on Survivor, the
Hmm.
David and Goliath season, which I haven't watched, any of the Survivor, and another reality show, Amazing Race, with his dad, which is another story because his dad was an evangelical minister in Pasadena, California, and he came out when Mike White was 11 years old. Did you know that?
Oh,
Or
no, I didn't know that.
okay, so that is a theme that comes up in season one of White Lotus with what is his character's name? Is it Mark Steve Zahn? Is that Mark his name?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm already forgetting the names of the characters in season one. So that's one of the themes there that he finds out during the course of the show that his dad was actually gay and he never knew about it. So, but it's just that and then when the show starts, the first season, you think, you mentioned that you watched the first show, and it looks like, is it going to be like Love Boat and Fantasy Island, which I think Mike White and I were about the same age, and we were seeing these shows as children, and these were very big, Love Boat and Fantasy Island was the other one. Is it going to be like that kind of a vapid show about rich people? And it starts off a little bit like that, and also there's hints of Basil Fawlty. In Fawlty Towers, the character Armand in season one even looks a little bit like John Cleese, and has the same
Yeah, yeah.
manic kind of energy. So I was like, is it going to be like that? But he takes all of this stuff that he's done so far in his life, including the Survivor theme and everything, and Enlightened and the Hawaii setting, and he makes of it something new and transcendent, which is why it's really interesting. I'm not sure if he's ever going to have a moment like this again. I don't think this is quite repeatable. He will do a season three, as we already know, perhaps in Asia, but I'm not sure that all these energies can come together again for someone like that. So this maybe probably is his peak moment, and really worth watching for that reason. But what I wanted to say was, the class element, I think that on this show, and I, as a writer, have been critiquing identity politics and the restrictions of the social justice philosophy, this current zeitgeist that we have in terms of young people, right? Censorship, what you're allowed to say and not say. This show brings a lot of that to the surface. And there's characters in both seasons who are uninhibited enough or rich enough that they can say the stuff and get away with it. And you're right that he puts it out there for us as audience members to judge of it as we will. And within that dialogue, I mean, there's an interesting dialogue. So in season two, it's Bert, the F. Murray Abram character, right?
Yep.
Who's most likely to do that. I mean, he's constantly flirting with young girls who are like,
The waitresses, the
yeah,
matron,
waitress,
yeah.
everybody writes like they could be his granddaughters, and he even explicitly admits that at one point in the last season. Is like, the girl Mia, who ends up being a piano singer at the hotel. He's like, she just hugged me and I got a little aroused, and he says that to his son, who's already in trouble with his wife for his philandering. and his grandson, who's just been played by a prostitute. And he says, look, I just got aroused, so he just has no inhibitions about expressing that old kind of patriarchal, treatment of women. And then within the show, typically Gen Z characters, Mike White, I think, again, is interestingly ambivalent about Gen Z in both seasons. In season one with Olivia and Paula, and maybe we can get into the class politics with Paula and Kai and what happens there. But with Olivia and Paula in season one, they're the daughters of Nicole Mosbacher, who's like kind of a cross between Marissa Mayer, the Yahoo CEO for a while, and maybe Sheryl Sandberg type of person,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's
Very
interesting. Yeah.
high-powered tech executive,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
He's zooming all the time that they're in Hawaii, right? So these are maybe in their early 20s, is my guess. They're young college girls, Paula and Olivia, very hip to the current social justice jargon, right? And what I want to say is it's interesting that as writers, as literary writers, all the freedom to say what's really on your mind in books or outside books has pretty much been taken away in this regime of self-censorship and censorship. Hollywood seems to be the only place in this country left. Politicians can't even really do that. Well, if you do that, you get in big trouble, right? Hollywood seems to be able to get away with at least putting it out there. Now, we can disagree. We can have a discussion about whether or not Mike White goes far enough with this ambivalent discourse when he puts it in the mouth of Gen Z characters about the current social justice jargon, right? Does he critique it enough, or is he just reinforcing that it's just bullshit and of no value, or does he have a real criticism of it? That's a discussion we can have. But the fact that Hollywood can at least sarcastically put it out there, right? So when it's in the mouth of Olivia, a pretty shallow character, and then she's in dialogue with her mother, Nicole Mosbacher, this big tech executive who keeps talking about how the white male is being, too marginalized or too criticized in this society, with reference to her son, Quinn, that's interesting because now you've got a dialogue within very rich, privileged people about how should they think about this social justice jargon and discourse that's going on outside them, right? Season two does it differently, but at least he's bringing this to the surface. And then meant to ask questions. How real, because you're talking about the artificiality, right? How real and worthwhile is it? Like, so when you have the Paula and Olivia interaction, Paula can say this stuff she can feel this about colonialism in the Hawaii setting, trying to help Kai with that pathetic $75,000, as if that's going to help him fight the government, and that pitiful amount of money is going to get his land back, right? And in the end, she decides to go back to her people ultimately because they are rich people, and she can't make the choice of leaving them or even distancing herself from them too much, right? So he brings it out there, and he, on the one hand, Mike White is saying, well, this is kind of ridiculous because ultimately there is no choice. Ultimately, the trophy wife in season one, right? I mean, was her name Rachel, right?
Yeah, Rachel. I was just going to say there's
Right.
kind of a parallel there where she
Right.
gets sucked back into a world that she doesn't like either.
Right. She can't go, and I forget the name of the Jack Lacey character. What's his name?
I don't know the actor's name. I'm assuming you're talking about Shane, her husband.
Shane, that's right. Yeah. The whom I guess many people would say, well, that was the real biggest asshole of season one, right? So she has no choice, Rachel, but to go back to him. And same would apply with the Gen Z character Portia, who
it's really interesting. I mean, sorry to cut you off, but the really interesting thing is that Rachel and Nicole interact, even though their lives are unrelated. They meet each other on the island because Rachel is an aspiring journalist who wrote what she thought was this puff piece about the Nicole character.
It wasn't
and
good
the Nicole
enough
character reams her, saying that was bullshit what you wrote about me.
Right.
And I have a feeling that encounter where Rachel feels like, how impossible is it for a young person like me with no contacts and no money to really break into this field,
Right.
right? Because here I am. I thought I was ingratiating myself with this crowd, and now I'm getting chewed out for it for no good reason because this person is just that egomaniacal that she took a puff piece as a hit job.
Mm-hmm.
I think that signaled to her the impossibility of living the life she wants on her own terms. And I think that's part of what informed her decision at the end to go to stick it out with Shane, because at least now I'm set. I'm good in that
Mm-hmm.
way.
Were you
Right? The world is
surprised?
just too scary to do on my own
Right.
because look, I'm trying to be a journalist. I'm writing what I
Right.
think is a great article that she's going to love. She's a hero of mine. I love her. And then what? Oh, now she gives me all this shit. I
Right.
think that scared her back into a life that she
Right.
really doesn't want for herself, but feels
Right.
she has to take anyway because they're her people now, right?
Right.
That's her tribe now.
And same with Paula. Same with Paula, and
Yeah,
even
exactly.
and Rachel with the domineering mother, which is Molly Shannon, right? So
The mother-in-law, that was Shane's
mother-in-law,
mother. Yeah,
right? Shane's mother, who brings his mother on the honeymoon, right?
right.
I mean, what a great guy. So she doesn't though leave her husband, and she just wants. I mean, the mother-in-law just wants the daughter-in-law to be the trophy wife and does the philanthropy and charity. And by the way, that kind of person, that circuit, I know them really, really well, right? I mean, this
Of
pseudo
course.
philanthropy, this circuit, this things that, I mean, that kind of person does. I know that stuff really well, and it's always been really disturbing to me. It's not even doesn't even come from a sense of guilt or whatever. It's just this is I mean, this is just a ritual they enact, right? And the parallel to that, to Rachel and Shane, would be this really disturbing, these two couples in season 2 who are of the same age. Theo James playing Cameron and his wife, who really is a trophy wife, Daphne, right? So that kind of is the future for Rachel if she persists in this lie. And then the other couple is Ethan, played by Will Sharp, whom I'm interested in now to watch his other work, and Aubrey Plaza, right? She plays Harper.
Right.
So Harper is not exactly a trophy wife, but her husband has come into a huge fortune. Maybe he sold off some tech venture or something. I mean, that's my guess. He's come into a lot of money, right? But Harper too does what Rachel does in season 1, which is in the end she decides she could have left him, but I guess part of the calculation is she is an employment lawyer. So she's not like unoccupied, she's not like
Like
writing
Rachel, yeah.
puff pieces like Rachel or completely unoccupied like Daphne. But she compared, I mean, in terms of her financial status compared to her husband, who's come into a huge fortune, I mean, it's like she also makes this decision to just be with him. I wanted to ask you though, were you surprised by Rachel in the end when she says, she shows up at the airport and like, everything is fine,
She says, "I'll
and
be happy." Yeah.
right, and then I'll be happy, everything is fine, because this is what her mother-in-law keeps saying, like, Rachel, you just got to be happy. And then Shane's reaction, coming especially after he's murdered or accidentally murdered or committed manslaughter on the most amazing
Right.
character Armand, the faulty, John Cleese character in
Right.
season 1, and he just says, "Oh, thank God."
Right.
I just thought that was like amazing when she says like everything is fine, and he doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel, like I've been an asshole, I just killed this person." He just literally says, "Oh, thank God." And by the way, there's a parallel to that airport scene in the second season with Portia and Albie. But I just wanted to ask you, were you surprised by Rachel going back to this, to Shane?
No, not really,
You
because I
weren't?
think they
Okay.
set it up well enough. I think, like I said, I think the conversation with Nicole set that up.
Uh-huh.
Kind of because it scared her out of a life on her own. And then I think as much as Molly Shannon, the mother-in-law character, as much as
Yeah.
she was awful, as much as we couldn't stand her, it didn't make sense to me that they would have wrote that scene into the show if it wasn't going to inform what Rachel ultimately does at the end,
Right.
right? Like that just wouldn't have really had a place. I think as a writer myself, because I've written film projects and things like that, and obviously you're a novelist, like what place does that scene have if it's not signaling that she's going to go back at some point?
Right.
Something's going to, for some reason, she's going to go back.
In retrospect, it seems like that was her only choice. Once it happens, you feel like, yeah, that was always going to happen. She was never going to leave him because, hey, she did have a 3-month engagement. She did know what she was getting into, right? It's not like it first became obvious to her during the honeymoon. Maybe it was more exaggerated during the honeymoon because now you're really just with each other, and she sees his interactions with Armand and the other hotel staff and so on, right? But she must have known what she was getting into. I think once you know Mike White's world, which is, I guess, one level of critique, is like once you know his world, I think season 2 became more predictable. And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess the people like Albie or Portia or Harper are not going to do anything crazy, radical to turn their world upside down, right? They're going to stay with the way things pretty much are. So that was more expected for me, but I think it was, for me, not knowing Mike White's world, it was a bit of a surprise still. It did make sense after it happened. I'm like, okay, yeah, she was always, Rachel was always going to stay with Shane, but I was, a bit surprised. There were less of an element of surprise for me in terms of season 2.
Well, I think that's why season 2 gets a little bit larger than life with the whole murder plot thing. Like the first season didn't have anything outlandish like that. We knew there was a death in the show, but even that death was not this, it didn't feel Hollywood. It felt like that's something that could happen, right? Somebody sneaks into your room and you don't know who's there and you have a knife and oops, right? The second thing gets involved with, mafia elements, and we don't know that it was the actual old world mafia. The old world mafia is very homophobic. I don't think the old world mafia would have taken a contract from a cabal of murdering gay guys.
Guys, the gays in capital.
Right,
right?
Exactly. I don't think that was the actual family, right, as they say. But it gets a little more Hollywood in that sense. And I think that's partly why, because I think you always feel like, I think in TV, you always have to raise the stakes with each season so that it doesn't stay as predictable as the season before it. But you're right, there absolutely are parallels. And one of the things I was talking about earlier about there being a moral core to the show, even though things are not black and white, right? There's a lot of subjectivity in interpretations of the show, of the different characters, in terms of who the worst people are, there really are no best people, but who the least worst people are, right? The whole Portia, Albie, I forget what the British guy's name was, who Portia falls for temporarily. Jack
in the movie. I mean, in the show, and I forgot his.
I don't know the actor's name.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have this sort of love. It's not even a love triangle, maybe a love rectangle between the hooker, Albie, Portia, and Jack. What was the hooker's name? Was it Valentina? That was the one.
Valentina is the hotel. Yeah.
Oh, no, that was the hotel person.
The hotel person, yeah. Lucia,
right.
Yeah.
And Albie is sort of the one who, at first, is sort of the most sympathetic because he's trying his best to sort of break the generational trend of male chauvinism that obviously his grandfather passed down to his father and that his father really could have passed down to him if he didn't try to break that cycle. And he's a nice guy. He's very respectful to women and things like that. But you could see that Portia, as much as she liked that about him, she also wasn't that attracted to him because of that. Like, she thought he should have been more aggressive. And then when this bimbo shows up in the pool, we immediately don't like him because he's going to fuck. And it's not that we don't really know much about him, but we know he's fucking things up for Albie, who we kind of like, right? Like, we kind of like Albie. We're kind of rooting for Albie to land the girl. And then along comes this guy who's going to fuck it up for him, and we know that. And so our instinct is to not like him.
Right.
And then this is what I mean, where there is a sort of moral center to the core, where Mike White is sort of directing us to not like him before we know anything about him. And then as it turns out, we have very good reason not to like him because he's not who he appears to be. He's part of this plot involving Tanya, who is Portia's boss.
Right.
We won't get into like super specifics. I don't want to give major spoilers in case some people haven't watched it yet. But we realize that he's not a good guy. Right? And so there was reason to be suspicious. Maybe we didn't like him for the wrong reason at first, but we were right not to like him. We were right not to trust him. We were right to think, who's this fucking guy getting in Albie's way?
Right.
right? So there's just an emotional payoff there that was set up through just sort of prodding our instincts, right? He
Mhm.
wasn't really giving us a tangible reason to not like this guy at
Right.
first. And it's the same thing, right? In I mean, we talked about Orange County. It's the same thing at Orange County when he gets to the Stanford party, and the people at the party are just as dumb, if not dumber, as his surfer buddies back home,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
we sense that the institution of academia is the villain in the movie because it's what's pulling people apart. It's what's pulling Colin Hanks apart from his
Well, is
girlfriend, apart from his family, apart.
right.
And so we get that. And then at the end, we see it. And the character realizes it. Now, there is no Colin Hanks character in The White Lotus. There is no protagonist in The White Lotus.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
all for us to interpret. So that's the difference. But the
Well,
ethos is kind of the same. Like he puts these signals out there. Okay,
right.
you should be distrustful of this person, of this institution, of this story arc, right? Don't really
Well,
know why at first, but you kind of figure it out as you go along.
well, exactly who are we mistrusting? And I think that's where you raised a bunch of really interesting things. Who exactly are we supposed to mistrust? So, at least in season two, I mean, and let's look at it from Mike White's perspective, who is a really smart guy. You can't blame him for not knowing, not being totally hip with the current political, liberal discourse, right? He knows all of it, backwards, inside out, right? And he's on top of it. He's able to critique it. And that's why he presents us people like Paula and Olivia and Albie with his criticism of patriarchy and his his grandfather's behavior, Bert's behavior, right, and his father's behavior in season two. So what happened is that Mike White was criticized for season one for not taking things far enough, and those were things that occurred to me too. And I thought, well, Kai, the Hawaiian guy that Paula, has a fling with, he just has meets with a very bad fate. Why would he even go along with the scheme to do this, this theft, right? And then he just disappears. Um, Armand has to die for letting go of his inhibitions and becoming a wild person, right? Belinda has her dreams smashed. Not to mention Lonnie, who just her water breaks and she has a baby or starts having a baby in Armand's office in the first episode, and then she just disappears. We never see her again, right?
Okay.
And the conversation about the extent to which you should feel guilt as privileged white people happens within the circle of white privileged people in season one. In season two, but you know what? Mike, think of it from Mike White's perspective. He could be thinking, you know what? I tried to go this far. I did this. This is much more than television usually will, right? And packaged it in this very interesting kind of murder mystery-ish kind of way. And yet the liberals are, or the social justice people are coming after me for not taking it far enough. You know what? Fuck it. Next season, I'm just gonna make it operatic about Tanya and sexual politics. To some extent, maybe perhaps he was stung by the criticism of season one. And then, so my point is, what do we do, even with sympathetic people in Hollywood who want to take us close to the truth, and open some new ways of looking at this stuff, right? Or many people did tear him down, and then in the next one, I think you would agree that there isn't this kind of interaction between that drops out, right? The interclass,
Right. Right.
oppression that basically drops out, except for Tanya and Portia. But even that is pretty minimal, and then they are kind of acting more like on more friendly, equal terms, toward the end, at least when they're both in danger. So that kind of drops out, and then you just have this Italian setting and the workers, the Valentina plot, I don't think works as well as the Armand, that they're just there. And the Italian people are rapacious, like Lucia. They're just exploiting American tourists, or they're crazy, howling banshees, like in Bert's dream of his relatives, right? So, I think that's much worse than what he did in, and that's Italy, which is not exactly a poor third world country, right? But it's just, and Taormina turns out to be this setting of for some really sordid stuff and, like, really bad stuff, right? And then the mafia. So he's using, this setting in a more problematic way than he used Hawaii. And he becomes, like, really explicitly operatic, right? So the first season was just clean, sharp lines, very neat plot. And here it's more complicated. So I mean, how can you in a way, how can you blame him? Because he did try to do something and then people came after him for that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, you could say he took it to a place in season 2 that perhaps was satisfying some of the
Uh-huh.
people who may have given him some pushback
Right.
for season 1, and I don't know of what pushback he received, but I'll take your word for it, because it's true that in season 1, the most odious characters get away with it
Shane,
because
literally
of
with
their
murder
class
class. Right.
status, right? I
Right.
mean, that's why they're able to get away with it. That's why Shane is able to kill someone, and there's no follow up. Is he in any legal trouble for it?
There's
You see
no
him talking to the
police
police after,
investigation, nothing. Yeah. He's
right?
fine.
Because his explanation is the guy broke into my room, right? you
Yeah.
know, and so I didn't know who he was. I had the knife out, and it was an accident, right? He's
Right.
not necessarily a
Right.
murderer,
Right.
but there is no consequence for that. In the second season, though, I mean, he does make the LGBT characters the villains of the season. Like they
Right.
they are the most dangerous, the most
The
cutthroat,
gays. Yeah.
right? The most money hungry, right?
Right.
The most ruthless. And so it was very sort of unwoke in that way, if you will. In terms of the hookers, sort of scamming Albie, that's a situation where, again, you know, this is again why I think there's a lot of subjectivity in the way people are interpreting the show, because
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of rooting for Albie. We sense that Albie's trying to do the right thing, but at the same time, he is a mark, right? He's this dumb rich kid who's here on vacation, and
Mm-hmm.
these are working girls, so they see a mark. This is how they make their living, right? This is what they do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Suck the money out of the dumb, the dumb rich kid, right? What's it to him? What's it to him? And as much as the whole charade of, oh, I need $50,000 or this guy's going to hurt me,
Mm-hmm.
Albie does get his father to do a good thing. And so in that sense, it wasn't in vain. It wasn't as though the money was totally lost, because Albie does gain a certain respect for his father when his father just gives it up, right? He has him, hey, this girl's in trouble. She needs $50,000.
Right.
Just give it. Don't
Right.
worry about it. Just give it. Just
Right.
do the right thing. Again, I hearken back to the Orange County, where the John Lithgow character, Hanks's father, basically bribes the kid's way into Stanford, right?
Mm-hmm.
He offers the money to rebuild the building that Jack Black burnt down when he was stoned. That's how he finagles him in, right? Just do it. He doesn't end up going to Stanford, just like this guy doesn't end up having a relationship with the girl, but he gets his father to do a good thing, right? And so in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, there was a small moral victory there. It wasn't all in vain. And in
Oh.
terms of the other characters, like even Cameron, right?
Uh-huh.
The whole Cameron, Harper, Ethan sort of triangle there, where we
Right.
get the sense we get the sense that Cameron always tried to take Ethan's girls from him, going all the way back
Right.
to their co-ed days, right?
Right.
And now we
Yes,
understand that
again.
Cameron is moving in on Ethan's wife, right?
Right.
He's just like this pathological horn
Mm-hmm.
dog who like has to have everything that Ethan has. He has to one up him at everything, even if that means fucking his wife. And eventually they get to a point where Cameron and Harper are going to go through with it, and Ethan ends up interrupting them. And it's funny because even in that moment where, okay, we obviously can't stand Cameron, but at the same time, we don't feel that much sympathy for Ethan either. It's like this kind of, I mean, my wife, as we were watching it, she's like,
Yeah.
well, it kind of serves him right. I mean, he's vacationing in Sicily with his wife and he's watching porn on his laptop rather than being with her.
Ethan
So,
is
like,
extremely unsympathetic.
yeah, he's just a wormy, stupid, dweeby
Nerdy
guy
guy
who
who came
like,
into money and has no idea how to communicate with Harper. He's just clueless. And then,
right.
it kind of makes sense. I mean, on the one hand, you could say that his spurt of enraged, possessive jealousy at the end. You weren't prepared for that, and where did that come from? On the other hand, maybe he's just so dim that that's possible that he would, react that way. I
Well,
don't
that's what
like
I
him at
kept
all.
saying. I kept
Yeah.
saying to my wife Amanda while we were watching it, this guy is one of the dumbest characters in TV history. I mean,
Yeah.
how could he not suspect that his wife is on to the fact that something happened while they were away, right? The whole thing where
Right.
she finds the condom wrapper on the couch. Like, how does he know not to actually sit her down and figure out what's going on and like
Right.
actually clear the air? Like, how can he actually
Right.
think it's okay to just let this uncertainty fester? Like,
Right.
he was a moron. He was dumb. So we didn't root for him either. And so
Right.
we didn't feel that bad for him when this happened to him as much as we hated Cameron. And so that's where there is this sort of like moral complexity to it. But again, as much as we can't stand Cameron, it goes back to what we said a half hour ago, which is that we've all met 100 Camerons in our lives.
Right.
Right. And a lot of people who know guys like Cameron may even like him, despite
Right.
the fact that he is that way. Like if you're friends with the guy, whatever, who cares what he does on his time, right?
Right.
So these character types are so typical. Like, yes,
Yeah.
the context in which they live is kind of larger than life, right? Because they're these multimillionaires, right, who live these lives
Right.
that
But
we
you can
can't
imagine
imagine.
a Cameron who's a little lower, maybe not go to Yale or whatever, but a little lower on the social scale, the
Of
college
course.
jock who ends up going into finance and they don't think
Exactly.
too
I
much
was
about
just
the
gonna
world
say the
and playing
quarterback on your
games.
college football team
Right.
could
So
be a Cameron,
we
right?
have lived with these people our whole lives.
Right.
They just happen to be a little bit richer than, maybe the typical person, right?
Right.
But it's interesting too that, I mean, this is something I want to get into is the way that, and how do you feel about this? The way that Mike White humanizes. I mean, there's certain things going on. One thing that there is no alternative. The fact that this is reinforced, as we said, in season 1 with Rachel, in season 2 with Harper, the games that Cameron and Daphne play to sort of keep their marriage interesting, which is kind of like, I'm having an affair, maybe you are, maybe Cameron and Harper and Daphne's kids they're not really Cameron's because she hints at the blonde trainer and
Oh, it's
what,
interesting. I didn't catch that. But
right,
yes, the kids are blonde when we see them on the screen. You're right.
on the screen, right? And she shows him. She's supposed to show Harper picture of the trainer, but she shows her pictures of her 2 blonde kids on the phone, right? So
That's
maybe that's one
interesting.
hint. And then another point. I mean, this struck me more where he's flossing his teeth. Um, Cameron is, and Daphne says, "Our kids, back in, I guess they're in LA or whatever, they want to talk to you on the phone." Is like, doesn't want to talk to them. Hey, buddy, how are you? Right? Because maybe he knows. So, I mean, regardless of whether or not they're his kids or not, and does he know or not, the fact that the big point is that they play these games, right?
Right.
In a way that's, what I mean, to keep things interesting, and they play the games with half knowledge, like don't completely admit that you may be, flirting or cheating with someone, right? But it's kind of there, which if you think about it, is a very sophisticated European way, not an American way. That's a very, aristocratic or, very, very cultured European way of dealing with, sexuality,
Well,
right?
Cameron brings that up to Ethan, right? He
What
says,
does?
the aristocrats used to fuck whoever they wanted, right?
Oh, I don't remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They
Something
weren't
like that,
bound
right?
by these like monogamistic
But just don't make a big deal
standards.
of it, right? And don't like, don't
Right.
don't be a cat about it. Don't like, be vulgar and, classless about it.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
I
that
mean
was
that's
the
a good
old
point.
European
And
idea.
that's exactly what I think the ethos of the show
Uh-huh.
is because maybe other audiences would view this differently, but like that's part of why I think most audience members can't stand Cameron and
Mm-hmm.
can't stand his wife because we just don't respond to that. Partly because it's not our world, it's not our culture. Like you said, that is more of a European thing, and that's
Right.
absolutely true. But also, we don't
Also
like it.
Mike White's world, probably,
Perhaps,
is my guess. Is
right?
Cameron more humanized for you by the end than he was at the beginning of the episode, Keaton? I mean, of the season.
I mean, when you say humanized, like I said, he's been human.
More,
He was
you like
humanized
him a
the whole
little bit
time.
more. Maybe you hate him a little bit less.
No,
Or
for me,
definitely no.
for me, my opinion didn't change at all. Didn't change at all
Okay.
because he's a guy who you have his number from the beginning, right? Same thing
Yeah.
with Ethan, really. I mean, those
Yeah.
characters. I mean, you're kind of rooting for Ethan and Aubrey to sort of work out um
They're
whatever problems they're
unresolved.
having, right? Their
Oh,
whole
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
dead bedroom thing, right?
Right.
So you're rooting for them, and part of the reason you're
Uh-huh.
rooting for them is because Ethan, as much as he's a dweeb and an idiot and a moron, when he has the opportunity to betray her, he doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you kind of admire that about him. And so, as pathetic as he is in other ways, you're like, well, he really didn't do anything wrong and irreversible. He's just too dumb to navigate the implications of what happened that night.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't actually do anything. And so you kind of are rooting
Mm-hmm.
for Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Cameron, you're just completely indifferent. Like, there's no emotional investment in that relationship because Cameron and his wife aren't emotionally invested in
But
each other.
aren't they? Isn't it obvious during the course of season 2 that at least Cameron and Daphne are more honest about how fucked up marriage is as an institution? By the way, I had seen Gone Girl just before watching these two
Oh,
seasons,
yeah,
so it
exactly.
was a perfect lead into this show. But they're more honest about how messed up marriage is, as opposed to the less sophisticated idea, the more American idea of Ethan and Harper, this perfect, beautiful monogamy, and we just got to communicate everything with each other at the same time as we are socially conscious and progressive and aware and enlightened. And these two guys are at least honest enough to say, you know what, it's fucked up. Do whatever it takes to make yourself happy. And you're in this situation, you have kids with this person. Okay, that's fine. You have a marriage, but take it for what it is in a limited sense and don't try to make something of it that is just impossible to realize, which is what Ethan and Harper are trying to do. So, in that sense, do you not feel a little bit more, you know, Cameron and Daphne a little bit more relatable, or,
Well, no, I certainly
memorable?
don't find them more relatable precisely because I don't really relate to that view of marriage
Uh-huh.
as an institution. Like, and this is where it comes into, this is where it gets interesting because like I would not put marriage as an institution up on a pedestal to be propped up or to be torn down. To me, marriage is what people bring to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what people bring to it. It's what they decide it's going to be for them. For
Mm-hmm.
people like Cameron and Daphne, it could very well be a property arrangement. So Cameron always has this
Right,
trophy piece that he gets to drag around with
right,
her. She has to put up with his shit. In return, he'll put up with a little of her shit if she has kids with the trainer, right? Or if she,
right.
flirts with people or even,
Yeah,
fucks other guys, whatever.
yeah,
That's their arrangement.
right.
But then if Ethan and Harper
Harper want to have this kind of
want to have
pure
this other
relationship.
thing and
Yeah.
that's important to them.
They're more like grown-up Albies, right? Ethan and Harper
Well,
are
yeah,
more
I
like,
mean, right. If
yeah,
that's important to them, if that's what they want, if that's why they got married, because
right,
they really value commitment, monogamy, and love, and then you root for them to sort of make that happen. So
right.
even if you're not as offended by Cameron and Daphne's vision of what a marriage is or what a family is, you still say, okay, to the extent that Ethan and his wife have made this investment, we hope it pays off for them,
Right.
right?
So generally, things work out for all the rich white people. In season 1, certainly, people are more reconciled more to their common fate. It's very true of the Mosbacher family, right? Olivia is closer to her mother. Quinn gets to do his little thing for a while, but he'll go back or whatever. He's still rich, right? And then the relationship between Nicole and her husband, is it Mark, when he suddenly becomes a hero and attacks Kai, right? They become reconciled and make fantastic love. And it's generally true for, for Albie and the DeGrasso family. They're at peace with each other, all three of them, by the end. So things work out for everybody except for Tina, and my question to you would be, is with Tina in season 2, by the way, she's the only character who comes back from comes to who's recurring from season 1, from in season 2. Is Tina
Oh, you're
more?
talking about Tanya, not
Oh,
Tina.
I'm sorry, Tana. Is Tanya more humanized for you than she was in season 1?
Yeah, because in season 2 she is in real danger,
Right.
and as much as we can't stand her for what she
Uh-huh.
did in the first season,
Right.
where she built up this working class woman's hopes and then just dashed them for pure psychological self-care bullshit purposes,
Right.
right? She tells her, "Well, I have to think about it because I use people with money and that's not good for me to do." It's like,
It's a transactional thing, and the way
right, it's a
she disses
transactional thing, and
Belinda, which is
nowhere in
complete
her
bullshit.
calculation
Right.
does she think, "Hey, I got this woman's hopes up that I'm going to change her life, and now I'm just going to pull that away for
Right,
no
which
other
is
reason, for no fault of her own, just because I have psychological baggage that I feel I have to deal with."
yeah, that was really bad. And the fact that we learned in season 2 that she actually is heirs to $500 million, $500 million.
Right. So this is literally chump. I
It's
mean, it's
really,
nothing
it's
to her.
nothing to her, because I didn't know in season 1, or maybe she's got like a few $1 million or whatever, right? We didn't know, right? In
Right.
which case $1 million or a couple million might have meant something, but literally it meant less than nothing to her given the extent of her wealth. So she turns out was even worse to Belinda than we thought in season 1, right? So in
Sure.
season 2 you're more sympathetic to her,
Well,
more
you're sympathetic because she is in danger,
right.
right? And as much as we can't stand her, we don't want her to die at the hands of this cabal of Sicilians who we don't
Right.
know much about except for the fact that her husband is involved with them
Sure.
somehow and they're going to kill her to get her money. Like, we don't want her to be done that way, right?
Right.
And so, like, we do want her to do what she does at the end where she mows them down, right?
Right.
But at the same time, we know that she can't really get away with it
He can't get,
because
that would be too much of a class
it's too much,
bias.
right? Because
Just
she
be too
does
explicit.
deserve.
Right.
It's not that she
Okay.
doesn't deserve a bad fate. She does, but she doesn't deserve it in that way.
Right.
She doesn't deserve to die at the hands of people who are really just as morally empty
Right.
as she is. And the whole thing that they do to Jack, where they make him pose as the nephew so that he can be their sort of traveling boy toy, and they obviously have subjugated him
Mm-hmm.
in this way that kind of
Mm-hmm.
robs him of whatever human journey he might want to go on, right? Like, they're just awful, right? And so, like, we want them to suffer as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so at the end, Mike White kind of has it both ways, where they get what's coming to them, and then Tanya ultimately gets what's coming to her. She dies. All right, this will be a spoiler. We're almost done with the recording anyway, so if you don't want to hear the spoiler, you can turn this off now. But she dies because she is a pampered, spoiled brat bitch, right? She dies because she's always been led around by her hand her whole life. She doesn't know how to climb off the side of a boat and leap into the dinghy, right? Into the lifeboat, right? She's that incompetent on her own
Right.
that she can't even, once she does the hard work of killing all the guys who are going to kill her, all she has to do is literally step over a rail and lower herself into a lifeboat, but she can't do it
She can't
because
even
she can't
do
do
that.
anything
Right.
on her own.
Right. Right. So I just want to reiterate that all the rich white people are better off, except for Tanya in season 2, as a result of these vacations in these exotic locales with colonial histories, and with Italy, with the history of immigration and the poor people from Sicily who came and so on, right? So there's that they are all humanized, including Tanya. And that to me seems a bit of a problem. I mean, that's a worry I have about this.
Well, at the end of season 1, if you recall, Tanya actually says, I forget who she says it to, but she says, "Death is the
The
one
only
fully immersive experience I haven't
feeling I
tried yet."
haven't had. Right.
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 Which signals that, yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, she's worse off because she's dead, floating in the water.
Right.
But in one more sense, this is her last sort of treatment, right?
Right.
This is her last attempt at peace, and it's the one that's
That's right. Yeah.
proven
Yeah.
successful every time.
How about if I make a case? How would you think if I proposed as worst people on each show, Paula, the Gen Z character in the first season, and Portia, the Gen Z parallel to Paula in the second season. Would you
Okay, well
go
that's
along with that?
interesting.
How
I
would you
mean,
think about that?
well that's interesting. Paula, I feel like you've already made your case for that, so we don't have to
Okay.
do that again.
Okay.
But
What about
Portia, I'd
Portia?
be interested in hearing that. Go ahead.
What do you think?
I'm curious to see what you think. Here, I'll just give my take on her
Okay.
very fast. Portia obviously makes a decision in the halfway through the season that she's going to choose Jack over Albie, right? She's going to go with the more aggressive, dumber, shallower sort of boy toy, right?
Mhm.
She's going to choose him over the nice guy, over Albie, right? And that kind of pisses us off because we've kind of built a rapport with Albie. We kind of root for Albie. We kind of like Albie a bit. We kind of admire what he's trying to do, even though he's not doing a perfect job at it. So we sense that she's fucked up, but we don't really blame her, right? We can't really blame her for being more attracted to the hunk than to Albie because Albie is a schmuck. Albie is, he's a wimp, right? So we don't blame her for that. Then she obviously learns that she made the wrong decision, right? Like she learns, right? She obviously learns that this guy isn't anything what he seemed to be, and is possibly part of a plot to murder her, right? So she fucks up, and then she goes back to Albie. She sort of chooses Albie for the same reason, or for a similar reason, that Rachel chooses Shane in the end because he's safe. He's safe. He's got money.
Stanford.
He's benign enough. Right?
Yeah.
Money.
Money, Stanford. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I mean, it's not quite the same because Shane is a more aggressive person than Albie is. Shane obviously has a violent, hostile, mean streak to him that Albie really doesn't have.
Right.
But it's similar in the sense that he is the comfortable pick. And she reverts to that after contemplating a more adventurous life for herself.
Right.
I don't see her as a reprehensible character, so I'm not inclined to say that she's the main villain, but I'm interested in hearing what you think.
I think the way that at the airport, and this is the parallel scene to Rachel and Shane at the end of season 1, when all is over and they've discovered the body and she has made her getaway to the airport and Jack has at least spared her life. It looks like he was meant to kill her, and she learns for the first time from Albie that Tanya may be dead
On her way, yeah.
On her, yeah,
or at least the wheels are in motion.
Right. And so her employer is dead, her very rich employer, and the way she reacts to that, and then she goes, "Oh, can I have your number?"
Right.
There's where's can I get your number? So she's again made peace with, although she is lower on the totem pole, but she's within on the periphery of this very privileged white circle of privilege and status, right? She's on the periphery of it like Paula, but she's made her peace with it. This is the best that she can get. Albie is not so bad. He may not be that exciting, right? And he's just, a bit of a nerd, but okay, fine. He's got all the other stuff that's going on. And so what if she can't be an intern or assistant? She'll just move on to this other. She wants to stay within the sphere of power, despite having just encountered really, really horrible stuff that can go wrong when you hang out around these people. She's also just learned what happened to Albie and Lucia, and he was like, "Oh, I got played." She was like, "Okay, fine, let's just move on." So I think going back to what we were saying at the beginning of this show, with Mike White being very aware of Gen Z's preoccupation with the current social discourse and putting it out there to make our own judgments. And he's also putting it out there, well, what choice do they have? Or is it the fact that they don't really have a choice? I mean, I think it's open. This is why I come down more harshly on Portia and Paula, because I think, well, maybe there is a choice. They just don't want to exercise it, because even if you are not at the center of power, to be close to it is a certain form of power. Diluted, maybe not as strong and magnetic and charismatic, but still you're within. There's a certain security in being close to it, in staying within the circle, right? But when you leave it all together, Quinn doesn't really leave it all together because he's still the child of very rich people, right? If he really gets in trouble, he can call for money or whatever, right? He's not like really risking his life or anything. So, but for Portia, it's different, and she has no choice. And that's the part I find really hard is that, you know, Mike White has now these incredible resources with HBO. He can do anything, he can make anything, he can take season 3 anywhere. Where's he going to go? He's probably not going to go to Japan. That's very difficult culture to deal with, right? Because then he
Right.
is going to have to, he having set the premise of these 2 seasons, he has to present that culture to some extent. And I think if you went to a place like, let's say, Japan, it would be very difficult for him to do. It wouldn't be as difficult in Southeast Asia, maybe something like the Maldives or an island situation. You can deal with that because you can treat them more superficially, right? But when you have
Right.
a rich culture like Japan, then you really have to deal with this stuff, right? So I think and Albie too. I don't like him as much as, and I think the reason is because, yeah, so he's got all the resources, HBO. But what is it that we are really, perhaps we are propagandizing this no alternative view of life, not just in season 1 more in terms of class and economics, right? Well, Belinda, you can't really have your own wellness center, so this is the best you can hope for. Kai, you're not going to be able to fight the government and get your land back, but at least don't go to jail. You had something going before, right? That was your only choice. Um, in um, in in season 2 with Albie, even in terms of the sexual politics, if that's the main theme, there was a scene which really stood out to me. There was a scene at the very end at the airport where the 3 generations of DeGrassos, you remember that, right? With the
Oh yeah, of
beautiful
course. Yeah,
woman walking by,
it's
right?
a famous moment. Yeah,
Right.
it's
And
very much
all
talked about.
three
Yeah.
of them, the grandfather, who's the unregenerate, patriarch, and then Dominic, Michael Imperioli from, Sopranos, the father who's really great, who's cheating with different women, and he also turns around and looks, and then Albie does too, having just been played by Lucia, right? They all turn around in the exact same posture. They can't help themselves. And this was a recurrent theme in season 1 as well with Mark was his name, Steve Zahn, who's worried about that he has literally testicular cancer and he's going to lose his balls or whatever, literally,
Right.
right? So he literalizes that, right? So what keeps coming up is the monkey brain or the monkey side of us or the animal side of it. So on the one hand, you have to play these economic games in order to maintain this level of security. On the other hand, when it comes to sexual life, private life, intimate life, you can be like Cameron and Daphne, play these games, right? Give vent to your animal side, monkey side, which I hate to even say monkey or animal because that's just a very biased way of looking
Yeah,
at
I know what you mean.
animals, right? You see what I mean, right? Or in the case of Albie and the DeGrassos, they're still going to. It seems like all 3 generations. Albie may say good stuff in terms of the current politically correct jargon about women and so on, like be nice to them. But ultimately, is he really going to be that different? So he puts those. Mike White puts these 2 things in conflict. Like you can talk like this, but our animal instincts, both in terms of economic assertion or competitiveness and in terms of sexual life, are just too strong to be overcome. And that's the disturbing part with Albie and with Portia, who just so easily moves on from one sphere of security to trying to latch on to another sphere of security. So I think it's just a way of reinforcing, our more bestial side or animal side. Again, not just, I don't like to use those, that kind of description, but just to say that there's no alternative. This is the only way we can be. Do you see what I mean? I mean, do you find that like, does that bother you,
Well, I mean, I think, I didn't read the whole piece, but I saw a certain article that
Oh,
suggested like that the story was sort of like almost an origin story for Albie to end up more like his father than he wants to be, right? Because of this experience of, not getting the girl he wanted and then getting played by the hooker, right? It's sort of like that could inform a certain attitude towards women that obviously his grandfather and his father both share. Right. And so even though he doesn't really embody those things, because it's not just jargon on his part, like he is very delicate with
Portia.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. The other names.
Yeah. He is with both of them.
He's very delicate with her at first, which is part of the reason why she doesn't respond to him right away. Right. So I don't think it's just that. I don't think he was being superficial in that way. I think he was trying to be a certain person that he might fail to be, or maybe fail is too judgmental, but he won't turn out that way precisely because it's just not in his wiring. Maybe it's not in any of their wiring or any of our wiring to turn out that way. And that's what that simultaneous head turn at the end was all about.
Yeah. I mean, I can see your point of view. I mean, you could easily make a case that Albie is the nicest person on the second season. You could even make a case for Paula, contrary to what I just said, if you want to take the other side of the argument, but at least she's, in a fucked up way, tries to do the right thing. And these people are not going to miss their $75,000 bracelet, right? So you could make a case for Albie really feeling this. This is not a matter of jargon for them, but they are now indoctrinated in this other way of looking at women and the interaction of men with women, right? Which is also true of Harper, because she's also enlightened, in these feminist terms. So I can see your point of view that you could say that this is not just like ritual role playing for them, but they have really completely assimilated this worldview. And then what Mike White does is he brings them up against the realities of the older generations who are not so in tune with this way of thinking.
Yeah,
and
the realities of human nature,
right? And also human nature is another point that Mike White is saying, like, well, this is just not human nature. You can't really do this because this comes up against the limits of human nature, at least as far as Mike White wants us to see it. So yeah, I mean, I can see your point of view that maybe they really are, genuine in their beliefs in this regard. The Gen Z people in this on this show.
I think Paula was genuine in her beliefs, in those sort of, progressive.
And you get to like Olivia more by the end, right? Olivia in the first season, you got to like her more. Also, it's fantastic. Like, on what show can you?
That's what I meant. I meant Olivia. I said Paula.
Olivia, right?
I meant Olivia though.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and when she says in the beginning, like, that's when I thought this is going to be really interesting. I think maybe it was the first episode when she's like, oh, Hillary Clinton is not just a neolib, but she's also a neocon. And I was like, wait a minute. Because that means the writer of the show, I mean, he's got the whole,
he understands that critique, right?
He understands everything, right? Because the fact that he can say that about Hillary Clinton, not just a neolib, but also neocon, because that is the essence of the criticism. And then, the fact that she can say that, and then, well, how is it going to play out in your practical life, or in your life of extreme privilege? How are you going to give any expression to that view, right?
Exactly.
So,
all right, man. Well, thanks. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. This was a good one. I think that's a wrap. But look for this, guys. Thank you to our patrons and paid Substackers. You're getting the first look at this.
It was a great show. Watch the show. It's just really, fantastic. You rank it really high among the TV that you've seen recently, or
recently. I mean, it's like I said, it's the kind of thing where it's not as bingeable. Although I can't say that because I did get absorbed in it. It's like a Robert Altman movie in that way. A lot of characters, a lot of seemingly unrelated things going on. Especially in the first season. The second season was a little more plot driven than the first.
Right.
The first was just character and dialogue driven in the way that like a Robert Altman film is, where the plot is sort of background and you're just sort of a Nick Carraway type mingling with all these characters that you kind of want to know more about, even if you don't like them.
Sure.
Right. All right, guys.
Very, very interesting characters. And one last thing we should mention is also the score. Especially the first season.
The first season really used that score very well.
That was really good. And then the second was a remix of the first season. Not as effective, I thought, but still quite interesting at moments. But the first season score was just, I mean, that just gets you right there. If
Yeah,
nothing
the
else.
first season, the score was really, really used well. It was
That
just
was
this like
amazing.
rhythm of the show. Yeah, they
Right.
would use it over and over again. That theme.
Right.
Yeah, very, very well
You
done.
hardly see this in the best movies these days. No, so
Yeah, no, definitely.
This
That's
is TV
true.
for you. Anyway, it was great. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Anis.
Thanks.
As
Thanks a lot.
always,
Yeah.
pleasure.